Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most fascinating and, honestly, sometimes terrifying ways that humans make decisions. We're talking about the ethics of outcomes. Okay, let's just jump right in by putting you directly into the middle of a really high-stakes, life-or-death moral dilemma.
Picture this. You've got a classic ticking bomb scenario. A lone police officer accidentally stumbles upon a suspect in a house that's just totally surrounded by bomb-making equipment. The guy admits he's planted a bomb nearby and is set to detonate in exactly 1 hour. But there's a catch. He absolutely refuses to tell the officer where it is. Now the officer is completely on his own, and backup is over an hour away. So he has a choice to make. Does he use force, potentially even torture the suspect to extract that location and save countless innocent lives? Or does he go by the book, follow the rules, and risk an absolute massacre? What would you do? Would you authorize torture if it meant saving the innocent? Well, that question right there sits at the very heart of the ethical system we're unpacking today.
So, to figure out how to even begin answering that question, we really need to understand something called teleological ethics. Teleological theories look strictly at the end purpose or the final goal of an action. The most famous version of this? Utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is a consequentialist theory, which basically just means actions are judged entirely by their results or their consequences. It's also a relativist theory. Now, what's really interesting and controversial about this is that it means there are no universal moral absolutes. Nothing is intrinsically right or wrong in all situations. Your motives? They literally don't matter. They're morally neutral. The only thing that actually matters is the outcome.
Section 1. Bentham's Act Utilitarianism. Let's look at where this all started.
Now, the founder of this, Jeremy Bentham, didn't invent this sitting around in some ivory tower. He was looking at the rampant poverty, disease, and just horrific working conditions of the Industrial Revolution, and he was absolutely disgusted. He felt like the law was just there to protect money, and the church was just defending the status quo. He wanted a moral basis for law that actually helped the whole of society. His big eureka moment came from reading a simple phrase that totally changed his life, and he ended up building his entire ethical system around it, the principle of utility. It simply means the greatest good for the greatest number. Bentham defined good as pleasure or happiness. He believed nature essentially placed us all under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. So his system is purely quantitative. It's math. Happiness is just an equation. Pleasure minus pain. If an act delivers more pleasure than pain, it's right. If not, it's wrong. And crucially here, everyone counts equally. The pleasure of a poor flower seller drinking a weekly bottle of cheap gin, that is mathematically equal to a wealthy couple attending the opera.
But, how do you actually calculate something like that in real life? Well, Bentham actually gave us a tool for it. He called it the hedonic calculus. It's this 7-step mathematical formula used to measure pleasure and pain in every unique moral situation. If you have a choice to make, you have to calculate, number 1, the intensity of the pleasure, 2, its duration, 3, the certainty that it's actually going to happen, 4, the remoteness, like how soon will it occur, 5, richness or fecundity, is it going to lead to even more pleasure later on, 6, purity, will it be followed by pain, and 7, the extent, simply how many people is this going to affect. So let's actually see this calculus in action.
Imagine you're a doctor. You're driving late at night to see a patient, and you come across a brutal car crash. 2 drivers are completely unconscious with internal injuries. You quickly identify one of them as your patient's husband, and the other as an elderly gentleman. Wait, I should add, your patient is a young mother in severe pain about to give birth. Without your immediate help, all 3 of these people might die. So who do you treat first? Well, according to Act Utilitarianism, you run the hedonic calculus. You weigh the intensity, the duration, the extent. And the cold, hard, mathematical answer, you treat the pregnant woman first. She and her unborn child have the greatest potential for future happiness, the longest duration of life ahead, and saving her impacts the most people positively, so she gets the treatment. Like I said, it's cold, hard, moral math.
Section 2. Flaws in Act Utilitarianism. Because math, as we know, has no feelings, let's look at the dark side of this.
The problem is, if the only thing that matters is the final score of pleasure over pain, things can get terrifying really quickly. Consider this famous thought experiment from philosopher Bernard Williams. It's about a guy named Jim. Jim is a botanist, and he accidentally wanders into a small town square in South America. He sees a row of terrified Native Americans tied against a wall. A corrupt military captain, Pedro, is about to execute them all just to deter protests. But seeing that Jim is an honored foreign guest, the captain offers him a completely sickening privilege. He says, if Jim takes a gun and shoots just one of the Native Americans himself, the captain will let the rest go free. But if Jim refuses, Pedro kills them all. And if Jim tries to play the hero and shoot the captain, the soldiers will immediately kill Jim and all the villagers. The villagers are actually begging Jim to accept the offer. So, what should he do?
According to Bentham's math, the answer is incredibly simple. Jim has to shoot the innocent man. One death creates less total pain than 20 deaths. But man, this reveals some massive flaws in act utilitarianism. First off, we can't ever truly predict consequences. I mean, Pedro might just turn around and kill everyone anyway, right? Most chillingly, though, this logic justifies absolutely any act. When the math works out, things like murder, torture, and betrayal suddenly transform into moral duties. Furthermore, there's zero defense for minorities here. A majority could theoretically vote to enslave a smaller group, and as long as it made the larger group happy enough, the math says it's right. And practically speaking, you simply cannot run a 7-point mathematical calculus every single time you face a daily decision. It's just not possible.
Section 3. Mill and higher pleasures. Realizing all these massive problems, the next generation had to step in. Enter John Stuart Mill. Mill was also a utilitarian, but he aggressively rejected Bentham's idea that all pleasures are mathematically equal. He thought Bentham's whole approach entirely missed the higher values of human nature. So Mill essentially gave utilitarianism a qualitative upgrade. He split human experience into two distinct categories. Over here on the left, we have lower pleasures. These are your basic animalistic physical urges: eating a giant cheeseburger, having a drink, taking a nap. On the right, we have higher pleasures. These involve using our higher intellectual faculties, reading poetry, composing a symphony, or, watching an explainer on ethical philosophy. Mill argued that these higher pleasures are intrinsically superior to the lower ones. Basically, quality matters just as much, if not way more, than quantity.
Which brings us to one of the most famous quotes in all of philosophy. Mill argued that humans should seek to fulfill their absolute highest potential. He said, "Better Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. Better a man dissatisfied than a pig satisfied." Fulfilling our higher intellectual ideals is the true goal of human happiness, not just adding up units of basic physical pleasure.
Section 4. The harm principle. Because Mill didn't just stop at higher pleasures.
He knew he had to solve that terrifying problem we talked about earlier, the tyranny of the majority. That scary idea that 51% of people could vote to torture the other 49% if it just made them happy enough. To fix this, Mill introduced an absolutely crucial protective mechanism called the harm principle. This states that society can only interfere with an individual's actions to prevent harm to others. Over his own body and mind, the individual is completely sovereign. This is a massive shift. It ensures that a majority cannot sacrifice a minority just to boost their own happiness scores. You can't execute an innocent person just because an angry mob demands it. It protects individual rights while still aiming for the greater good.
Section 5. Act versus rule utilitarianism. Let's actually bring Bentham and Mill head-to-head on some real-world issues.
Let's apply their theories to something incredibly heavily debated today: animal experimentation for medical research. On the left, Bentham's act utilitarianism just runs the immediate math. If testing a new vaccine on 100 animals causes them terrible pain, but it ends up saving 10,000 human lives, well, the intense, widespread human pleasure drastically outweighs the animal pain. The act is totally justified by the immediate outcome. But on the right, Mill's rule utilitarianism asks us to look at general, overarching rules. A rule utilitarian might argue that having a societal rule like "do not inflict cruelty on feeling creatures" is actually essential for our own moral development. Breaking that rule degrades society's empathy and our capacity for those higher pleasures over time, which totally changes the ethical math. They aren't just calculating that single lab test, they are calculating the long-term impact of the rule on society's soul.
Now, within rule utilitarianism itself, there's actually a spectrum. Strong rule utilitarians say that rules are absolute, you must never break them. But Mill was what we call a weak rule utilitarian. He believed rules are essential, but they can be broken in extreme catastrophic cases to prevent massive harm. Let's apply this to the ultimate extreme, the use of nuclear weapons as a deterrent. A strong rule utilitarian would look at that and say, never build weapons of mass destruction, ever, because the potential harm violates all utility forever. But a weak rule utilitarian, maybe looking at the intense tension of the Cold War, might argue that the rule can be temporarily suspended. If possessing a nuclear deterrent is literally the absolute only way to prevent a global world-ending war, then the extreme utility of preventing total human extinction actually overrides the rule against building the weapons. Wild, right?
Which brings us to a question I want to leave you with today. Does utilitarianism promote justice, or does it just give us an excuse to justify the immoral? From a ticking bomb to animal testing for medical cures to the terrifying calculus of nuclear deterrence, can an ethical system based entirely on outcomes truly provide a safe, practical basis for moral decision-making? Does Mill's rulebook save Bentham's dangerous math, or are we always just one extreme calculation away from doing something terrible for the greater good? Think about that the next time you find yourself weighing the ends against the means. Thanks for exploring this explainer with me today. See you next time.